Miranda was having a hard time coming to terms with the fact that her fiancé broke up with her. Unfortunately, David wasn't who he claimed to be. He'd been deceiving her throughout their entire relationship, feeding her stories about his great love and their happy future together. In reality, however, the man had no intention of getting married and planned on living his life as a bachelor for at least a few more years. Their breakup was very painful, and as is often the case, didn't happen without a huge fight. At that point, David voiced all the grievances he'd been keeping inside for a long time. He didn't even fail to remind his now ex-fiancée of all the gifts he'd ever given her. It was very uncalled for and frankly, mean. Miranda grew up in an ordinary family. Her mother worked as a waitress in a roadside cafe, while her father earned his living by repairing cars. There was never a lot of money in the family, and Miranda's parents had to save every cent. After graduating from high school, Miranda started college, which she later successfully graduated from. She had several relationships during her college years, but unfortunately, all of the young men she dated turned out to be mama's boys. Where did she even find them? Miranda's best friend Sandy asked her. Miranda only shrugged her shoulders in response, making it clear that she didn't know the answer to this question. Sandy was a bit more outgoing than her friend and was often dating several young men at the same time. Of course, many of those relationships didn't lead to anything serious, but according to Sandy herself, it significantly increased her chances of success. Miranda didn't approve of her friend's approach to dating and found such behavior simply unacceptable. It was then that she met David at one of the college parties. At first, Miranda didn't see anything special in him. It was only after a couple of dates that she felt a barely perceptible sympathy for the young man. Their relationship actually came as a surprise to both of them. Initially, it wasn't anything serious. But 2 months later, Miranda realized that she'd fallen head over heels for David. The young woman felt that David was exactly the kind of man she'd been waiting for. Unfortunately, as it later turned out, she was deeply mistaken, and that mistake cost her a lot of lost time and peace of mind. But I always told you that you needed to date around to increase your chances of meeting someone worthy, Sandy continued. The worst part for Miranda was the fact that it was David who initiated the breakup. For some inexplicable reason, he suddenly realized that he didn't want to have anything to do with his fiancée. At that point, Miranda had no idea what the true reason for their breakup was and tormented herself with all kinds of theories and assumptions. The truth came out much later, when Sandy told her that David had a new girlfriend and that she came from a very wealthy family. Of course, being the handsome and charismatic young man that he was, David had no problem getting the rich woman's attention. Miranda, however, needed more time to recuperate and was thus in no hurry to look for a new boyfriend. She needed time to feel her emotions and to heal before she could even think about starting a new relationship. By that time, she was already working as a sales manager for a large trading company whose services were used throughout the United States. Despite the fact that there were many men working at the company, Miranda couldn't allow herself to get close to any of them. After what happened with David, she couldn't trust anyone and thus rejected any advances from men. Of course, it was wrong, but Miranda couldn't forget her fiancé who treated her so cruelly. The young woman felt as if all the color was sucked out of her life after the breakup. Nothing seemed to bring her joy anymore, and the best she could do was force herself to smile ironically. Stop living in the past. You're burying yourself alive right in your room. Sandy tried to support her friend. At some point, Miranda's depression reached its peak. The young woman virtually stopped going out in public, with the exception of the office and the grocery store. It was then that Sandy realized that drastic measures had to be taken. First of all, she invited her friend to go to a nightclub in order to unwind and distract her from her sad thoughts. At first, Miranda refused to go, and there seemed to be no convincing her. The young woman felt that all men were just waiting for the right moment to play their tricks on her, to take advantage of her gullibility and naivete. But Sandy was more experienced, and she didn't share her friend's take on the matter. Therefore, at the cost of incredible efforts, she managed to persuade her friend to make the right decision. Put on something catchy, a short dress. You don't want to look like you got lost after a Sunday service, Sandy said in a tone that brooked no objections. Of course, Miranda never wore anything provocative, so she put on a rather reserved dress that went down to her knees. The nightclub Sandy took her to was rather popular, and most of the residents of the city knew about it. In fact, it wasn't just the locals who attended it, but also people from neighboring cities. A couple of cocktails did their job, and soon Miranda was feeling much better. The music no longer seemed so loud, while the attention she got from men didn't seem so annoying anymore. Of course, the young woman wasn't looking to find her soulmate there, but some innocent flirting was a good start on her road to recovery. But then, a tall, brown-haired man with gray, slightly sad eyes on an aristocratic face noticed her. "Excuse me, can I ask you to dance?" the stranger asked timidly. At first, Miranda thought that she didn't hear him right. With such a spectacular appearance, this man could have chosen any woman at the club. Instead, he was standing in front of her, shifting from foot to foot and waiting for her answer. "Yes, of course. I'd love to dance with you," Miranda murmured. A minute later, they were already out on the dance floor, surrounded on all sides by young people enjoying themselves. As it turned out a little later, the young man's name was Jacob. He wasn't local, but came to visit his relatives for the weekend. Having noticed that he didn't have a ring on his finger, Miranda concluded that he wasn't married. Jacob behaved rather modestly and didn't allow himself anything that could make his companion feel uncomfortable. Watching the scene unfold from afar, Sandy decided not to interfere, having realized that the two of them needed to feel comfortable around each other. Having been single for a long time, Miranda felt a strong sympathy for this calm and confident young man. The fact that Jacob was very different from David was clear as day. Her ex-fiancé often behaved arrogantly, especially in public, always trying to get everyone's attention and completely forgetting about his fiancé's presence. Jacob, on the contrary, respected his companion and took great care not to offend her in any way. It just so happened that after the nightclub, the young people decided not to part ways and continued their night in a hotel room. It's hard to say whether this decision was spontaneous or if it went by some pre-planned scenario. But what happened next left the most pleasant impression on Miranda. Jacob was gentle, considerate, and affectionate. He acted as if he knew exactly what he needed to do. But when morning came, Miranda felt very ashamed of herself. The woman immediately started feeling as if she did something very wrong. Miranda was afraid that now the whole city would know that she had a one-night stand. Since Jacob was still asleep, the young woman got dressed quietly and left the room. But before leaving, she left a note on the table thanking Jacob for a great time. For some inexplicable reason, Miranda decided that it would be their only meeting, and therefore she didn't see the point in staying to see the man wake up. It seemed to the young woman that it was all just a moment of weakness on her part, and that it wouldn't lead to anything good. But as soon as Miranda got home, Sandy immediately called her. "Well, tell me everything. How did it go? I hope you didn't go home alone after the nightclub." Miranda admired her friend's intuition yet again. How does she do it? It's as if she was there with us, the young woman thought. "No, I didn't go home at all, but I don't think it was the right decision," Miranda added, embarrassed by her own frankness. Deep down, Miranda knew that as soon as she voiced her doubts, she'd have to listen to her friend's angry objections. The way Sandy saw it, Jacob was the perfect candidate for a casual relationship. A week flew by. Not a day passed that Miranda didn't think of that night, which seemed to come back to her a ghostly vision or some kind of obsession. During all this time, someone kept persistently calling her from an unidentified number. At first, Miranda didn't dare pick up the phone, but then she plucked up her courage and answered the call. As she suspected, it was Jacob. The man blatantly refused to tell Miranda where he got her number. "Hey, where did you go? I read your note, but I couldn't answer," the man said with mock resentment in his voice. At the sound of his voice, Miranda broke into a sweat, while her heart started beating wildly. The young woman had never experienced such excitement, and the realization of this made her reconsider her attitude towards Jacob. "I don't think we should see each other again." Miranda tried to salvage the situation. But Jacob had his own take on the matter and immediately invited the woman to have dinner together. Unfortunately, Miranda didn't give a final answer and asked him to give her time to think. But when she told Sandy about it, her friend laughed merrily. "I think it's about time you thanked me. I don't think Jacob could have found you without my help. I was the one who gave him your number." It took Miranda a long time to make a decision about her potential date with Jacob. But then, having weighed all the pros and cons, the woman decided to take the chance because she realized that she didn't really have anything to lose. Jacob was waiting for Miranda at the entrance of the restaurant with the bouquet of roses in his hands. Inside, a table with chilled champagne was already waiting for them, as well as a great variety of exotic dishes. As it turned out, Jacob knew his way around exotic cuisine and was overall a very intelligent young man. At the same time, he shared virtually no information about himself or his family. The evening went well, leaving the warmest aftertaste in the souls of the young people. Although this time, Miranda and Jacob didn't go to a hotel, but parted ways at the exit of the restaurant. Ever since then, they started seeing each other almost every day. Nevertheless, their relationship was purely platonic in nature, and first of all was aimed at spiritual rather than bodily connection. This was partly due to the fact that Miranda was supposed to take part in important negotiations soon, where she would act as a speaker. The young woman spent her evenings preparing documents and reports in order to present them to the business partners who were to come in from a neighboring city. All this took her a lot of strength and energy, which couldn't go unnoticed by Jacob. "Please don't worry so much. I'm sure you're already very well prepared and everything will go great." The man tried to support Miranda. Finally, the important day had come. When Miranda entered the firm's office, the assistant said that the partners from the neighboring city were already waiting for her in the director's office. Imagine the young woman's surprise when she saw that sitting next to the head of the department was Jacob, dressed in a business suit. Miranda stiffened up visibly while her cheeks flushed with shame. As it turned out, Jacob was the very business partner whose visit the director of their firm was waiting for. To say that Miranda was shocked would be a huge understatement. She could have suspected anything, but not that the man she'd been spending time with was a successful businessman. At first, Jacob seemed like an ordinary man who had some money to spend on having fun. Feeling Jacob's invisible support, Miranda gave her report. The company's director was extremely pleased with her performance. Meanwhile, Jacob just smiled and nodded his head meaningfully. After the meeting, he invited Miranda to a restaurant in order to tell her some extremely important news. Now, he's probably going to tell me that he's married and everything that happened between us was a mistake, Miranda thought anxiously. But when Jacob pulled a velvet box from his pocket, the woman couldn't help but tear up. "Miranda, honey, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Now you know who I am, and it doesn't make sense for me to keep pretending anymore," Jacob said. At that moment, Miranda felt that she was in some kind of a fairy tale. Just recently, she was depressed and couldn't get over her breakup with David, and now she was a princess who was being courted by a handsome young prince. "I would love to be your wife," she whispered with tears in her eyes. Many other great things happened that evening, but there was one that was especially memorable. As the couple was leaving the restaurant, Miranda bumped into her ex-fiancé. The man was walking hand in hand with the woman who was at least 15 years older than him. I guess he really needed that money, Miranda thought caustically. Seeing his ex-fiancée, David hesitated for a moment and then quickly looked away. Frankly speaking, the man was ashamed to admit that his personal life was a complete failure and that he was now forced to date an older woman and live off her handouts. Miranda couldn't help but feel happy. It was a moment of true triumph and universal joy for her. A month later, Miranda and Jacob held a magnificent wedding, which was covered in the media and caused admiration among all the residents of the city. Soon, Jacob and Miranda built a strong business that brought them a steady income. And sometime later, the couple had beautiful twin girls who looked exactly like their mother. Meanwhile, David kept going from one older mistress to another and got a reputation of a kept man who couldn't provide a decent life for himself without the help of his older girlfriends. However, this fact meant absolutely nothing to Miranda. She directed all of her efforts to taking care of her children and husband, who had long become the meaning of her life.